Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everyone to our virtual Teen Science Cafe. We're excited to have you with us tonight. My name is Lauren Traster. I am the 4-H Teen and Leadership Program Coordinator, and I put on the virtual science cafes and the in-person science cafes, so you may have met me before, but we would first like to meet you. So I hope everyone can find your chat. And if you can go into the chat, tell us who you are and where you are from. We love to know where everybody's coming from. I am sitting in Hyde Park, Vermont tonight. Where are you coming from? If you don't know where your chat is on the menu, there's a chat feature. You might have to look into the 3 dots, an expanded menu. I would love it. I don't see anybody telling me yet. Here we come. We have Sarah's from Oklahoma. We're going to meet her a little bit more tonight. Sterna's here from Southern Vermont. We have Nelms from South Burlington and Lily from Essex. Adney's with us from Maine. Good to see some of our Maine friends are coming back again this year. It's really nice. And Xavier from Colchester. Well, welcome everyone. It's so great to have you with us. So again, if anybody needs the live captioning, so if it's better for you to kind of read what's being said, if you need that service, all you do is click on the link that I just put in the chat, and that brings you to the live captioning. The other thing that I would like you all to do, I want you to open up the participant list, and that's going to show a list of everyone who's here. And your name's going to be the first. And I would like to make sure that your name is appearing as who you actually are. And if not, I want you to click on the rename and make sure your name is put in correctly. And that's because we had a registration and we have to make sure that you are who you are matching up with the registration. So if you all can just make sure you do that, I would appreciate it. All right. Before we get into tonight's meeting, just want to tell you about how we run things in our virtual cafes. So we ask that you all stay muted unless you would like to ask a question or share a thought. So you would raise your hand using the raise your hand feature in Zoom. If you raise your hand on your video, we probably won't be able to see you. So use the feature in the menu. And then we would unmute you and let you ask your question or share your thought. You also can use the chat. Our presenter, Sarah, I know is going to want to have a back and forth conversation about her topic. And you using the chat or asking to unmute yourself are those 2 ways that you can interact. So we ask that you are just courteous and respectful. Make sure you don't create any distractions. So if you do have your video on, just make sure that there's nothing going on behind you that would be distracting or inappropriate. And we ask that you just stay engaged and participate fully. I know you're going to learn a lot tonight about microplastics. So it's going to be a pretty cool topic to learn about tonight. And before we get into tonight's topic, I do just want to let you know that we have a bunch of in-person science cafes coming up. We have one coming up October 22nd on sensory science, and then another one in November and December. We do one a month, and we have a whole lineup already into 2023. Can you believe that it's already going to be another year? So you can find everything at the website that's posted here. And at that website, you're also going to find out all of these other programs that we are putting on this fall. We have a Science Spark workshop, learning about the human brain, coming up this weekend. Thursday, like in 2 days, we're starting our Learn to Code program where you can learn to code and create your own website. We have a program where you can be trained to be a teen teacher to teach environmental lessons to younger students. We have a youth environmental summit coming up at the end of October. And then we also have a teen leadership weekend where if you would like to build and develop your leadership skills all while having a really fun weekend at an awesome hotel, you can join us for the weekend for that. It's a lot of fun. All right, so we are going to get to our presentation tonight on microplastics. And I want to introduce our guest to you tonight, Sarah Hobson. I apologize. I pulled up your bio and then I can't access it right now while I'm sharing my screen. So I'm gonna just give me one.
Good. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
No, I got it.
Okay.
I just want to properly introduce you. So Sarah Hobson is a graduate student at the University of Vermont in the field of natural resources with a focus on organics recycling. They graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a BA in both environmental engineering and international environmental studies, respectively. They are passionate about food recovery, circular economics, international living communities, and solutions to the climate crisis. So let's all welcome Sarah and let's give her our attention to learn all about the work that she does.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lauren. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me for a minute. Okay. Are you all seeing a screen that reads microplastics in compost?
Yes, we can see
Great.
that.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. As Lauren said throughout this presentation, I'd much prefer it to be a discussion instead of just a lecture. I think while I might know a lot about microplastics, I'm sure you all also know some, and I would love to learn together as well as share knowledge. In kind of a not just a one-way stream. So feel free to make use of the chat at any and all times. I'll try to keep up with it as I can. And also, feel free to raise your hand and provide any commentary you'd like. Very welcome. I'm just gonna get right into things. Tonight, I'm gonna start by kind of introducing myself a little bit and talking about my background. Then I'm going to get into the background of the research of microplastics and what they are. And then we're kind of going to start discussing microplastics in compost and soil. That's what I focus on. And then we're going to kind of end on a lighter note. What can we do about it? These are kind of scary, sad topics, and it's easy to get bogged down in the issues and how bad they are, but actually there are a lot of things we can do now, and there's a lot of hope we can have, and better to put those feelings into action instead of kind of lamenting our losses. So I moved here from Oklahoma about 1.5 years ago. There I went to undergrad at the University of Oklahoma, pretty beautiful campus you can see on the right, where I studied environmental engineering, but also international studies. I kind of have way too many interests, and just love to learn. And now I'm here in Vermont at the University of Vermont in Burlington, and I'm in love with it here too. And my research, as you all know, focuses on microplastics and really microplastics in compost, as well as in agricultural soils, as we'll learn about tonight. I also have way too many hobbies, especially love being outside. Behind me is Franconia Ridge, a hike I just did. Absolutely beautiful hike in the Whites in New Hampshire. Plastics, right? I'm sure if you all look around wherever you are, you could probably see easily at least 10 things around you that are either completely made of plastic or contain a little bit of plastic, from the clothes you wear to maybe a mechanical pencil, calculators, anything else. We produce a lot of plastic, right? Actually, 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic have been produced in the last 70 years. Why since the 1950s? That's kind of when plastic production really started to ramp up. And especially with the rise of disposable plastics in the 70s. And it's kind of just continued to increase since then. But yeah, this is a colossal amount of plastic, and we're still producing enormous amounts every day. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about plastic in the ocean. Just a quick, if anyone has heard about plastics in the ocean, would you be able to share a comment in the chat really quickly, either a yeah or like a specific instance of plastics you've heard of, maybe in the water, or if you've heard of plastics in land? And take a second to navigate to the chat. And yeah, there we go, create dead zones. That's a really good point. Have you, any of you, heard about a specific gyre, a specific name? Yeah, trillion bits of microplastics, right? That's a ton. So it sounds like, yeah, whale stomachs. We see a lot of media about these like ocean wildlife. Think about sea turtles, yeah, all sorts of animals in the ocean that have been found with plastics in their stomach or around their necks, and all these gory pictures that kind of stick in your mind. Yeah, Lily mentioned the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So a lot of our focus and a lot of research focus actually too has kind of centered around these plastics that are in water, right? But something that we haven't really taken too much time to consider are the plastics that are in our soils and that aren't in water, but instead of aquatic, we say terrestrial areas, so on land. And actually, we should be focusing on this because, you know, according to one study, there's quite a big range here, but 4 to 23 times more plastic enters soil than it does oceans. That's a huge amount more than enters oceans. So if you think about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch or any instance of a ton of plastic in water, like we have even more of that in our land, in our soils that we live on. So we need to focus on this a lot more. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Yeah, and especially when it enters our food system, right? This is especially of concern. The soils that we're growing food in receive between 44 and 300,000 tons of microplastics every year in North America, according to one estimate. So these are colossal amounts of plastic that are kind of even hard to conceptualize. See if I can go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So speaking of hard to conceptualize, I just want to make sure that we have something more tangible. When I say 8.3 billion metric tons, kind of throwing around these big numbers, but attaching a meaning to them, it's a bit more helpful. So this is a poll for you all. I want you to all kind of guess what might be equivalent in weight to 8.3 billion metric tons. A metric ton is about 2,200 pounds, if that helps. Use funny metric units, huh?
I did launch the poll, so you should see it pop up on your screen and you can put in your selection. And then we'll see if you get it right.
And while you're taking time to consider these options, I'm also going to note that this is on a weight per weight basis or a mass per mass basis, and it's not on a volume per volume basis, because if we think about plastics, they're really lightweight. So to weigh like 5 pounds of plastic that's really lightweight, that's a huge volume amount, right? So if we think about a rock versus a piece of plastic, the rock is a lot more heavy. Or a whale. Whales are a lot more dense. We can say they have a higher density than plastic. So that's also something to keep in mind. That this is looking at the weight, but actually when we think about how big that is, it's like a giant volume of plastic that we're talking about. Okay, it looks like
I'm going to end the poll. And
yeah, it looks like everyone here has voted. And actually everyone's correct. Yeah, most of you guessed all of the above. Some people guessed other answers. Yeah, that's all correct. These are all different examples, ways to think about what 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic is. So well done in your voting. I would say all of the above, but really any answer is correct here. So yeah, these are colossal amounts of plastic we're talking about. 25,000 Empire State Buildings. That's insane. Has anyone been to the Empire State Building and can speak to how big it is? It's pretty wild. Okay. So we're talking about all this plastic being produced, but who really cares? There are a lot of people that care, especially composters. They're getting a lot of plastic in their compost potentially. That's what I'm researching, and there's a lot of concern from some of them. They don't want plastic in anything. They think it's an issue that needs to be evaluated. Policymakers here in Vermont in the State House are interested in making some policy to prevent plastics from entering our agricultural soils. There's a lot of concern about that. There's one proposed bill that was hoping to put a 0.5% by mass limit on how many contaminants can be in, and of those contaminants, no more than a fifth could be plastic film. Here, the special designation for plastic film is just because plastic film, back to density, has it's really lightweight. So if we're talking about weight, a small amount of weight could be a huge volume for plastic film. So there's concern from policymakers. They're trying to draft some policy. There's concern from practitioners in the field. And we're concerned too. If you check social media or are into meme culture, maybe you've seen a few of these around. It's a unique issue that especially our generation is going to have to deal with. Kind of one of the new pollutants, right? They cycle through the generations, from microplastic seasoning, that's one of my favorites, to them being the basis of our food pyramid. Pretty good memes there. So yeah, there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern about this, but we need a lot more research. So I've been kind of mentioning this term microplastic a few times already, and I just wanted to get a temp check and see where we're all coming from and what people might think a microplastic means. So yeah, go ahead and take your guess. Yeah, so it looks like everyone got that correct. They're tiny piece of plastic. One of the most common metrics is less than 0.5 millimeter. And just if we're all thinking in our US metrics, there are about 25 millimeters in an inch. So this is a really tiny piece for plastic, and that's kind of still debated what we consider to be a microplastic. Some studies look at plastics 5 millimeters and below, some are 0.5 millimeter, some are 1 millimeter. And that's still actually, because studying plastics is such a new thing. It's a really new field, and we don't have many standardized methods. So that means that it's harder to compare studies because they use different methods and different definitions. And that's kind of an obstacle limiting the pace of research where we can learn more to do more about these plastic particles. Let's see. So yeah, I'm going to get into microplastics a bit here. This is pretty content heavy, just for your interest. But yeah, so microplastics, I said 0.5 millimeter. Some studies say 5 millimeters and below, and some are less than that. There are a few other designations of plastic particles that are commonly used. Macroplastics are the plastics larger than 5 millimeters, sometimes larger than 10 millimeters. Again, these are there's a lot of gray area in these terms, and you have to look at the specific example of where it's applied to know, but mesoplastics are kind of in between macro and micro, usually 2 to 5 millimeters or so, sometimes 2 to 10, 2 to 20 millimeters. And then nanoplastics, a nanometer is 1,000th of a millimeter. So they're 1,000 times smaller than a microplastic. And there are a few different shapes that we usually look at for microplastics. Films, fragments, fibers, pellets. So to the right, you can see in these images, does anyone want to take a guess what shape we would consider image A to be? That can either be, if you want to turn your audio on or put it in the chat. Of that film, fiber, fragment, or pellet. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, there's someone guessed fibers, and that's exactly what I would say. What about B? Does anyone want to guess? Perfect. Yeah, and C again, fibers. B was pellets. D, I'd say fragments. Those of you being attentive could see that it's written in the caption as well what these shapes are. So the shape is something to consider. The shape dictates how that particle interacts with the environment, how microbes might land on it, how it might impact the soil. And then the composition, right? There are a lot of different types of plastic, and they all kind of have different chemical formulas. Plastics, mostly carbon, mostly long carbon chains that are not easily broken apart. They're very stable, which is why they last and persist so long in the environment. But yeah, there are two main designations of plastics. Maybe you're familiar with these. Thermoplastics or plastics that can be remolded. So they're the types of plastic that are most common, and they're the ones that we can recycle. And that's because they can be heated up, and if you cool them back down, they're the same thing. Whereas thermosets, after heating the plastic, when they're cooled, there's a chemical reaction that takes place. So it's set differently. So if you heat it back up again, it's not going to be the same thing. And for that reason, they're a lot harder to recycle. There is some research about how to recycle thermosets, but yeah, this is just to note that there are quite a few different types of plastic, and that's also another thing to consider. A study might focus on the impacts of one type of plastic and one shape of plastic and one size, but how generally applicable is that is another question to be considered. Yeah. So I mentioned that microplastics, they can be down to 0.5 millimeter, sometimes smaller than that in some studies. And I'm curious from you all what you might think that the smallest size of plastic we can reliably detect with our own eyes might be. And just for reference, 1 inch has about 25 millimeters, 25.4. All right, so most of you guessed 5 millimeters or 1 millimeter. And yeah, those are good guesses. We usually say 1 millimeter is the smallest you can see reliably and kind of maybe have an idea of the texture and the color and maybe be able to guess like, oh, that kind of looks like a plastic. So while some microplastics are visible, not all of them are. And that is something to consider when we're talking about methods, experimental methods to measure them or work with them. We have to keep in mind that these are often particles that we can't see with our own eyes. And for that reason, we need something like a microscope as a visual aid. So I mentioned plastics entering agricultural soils. There are a lot of different ways plastics might enter agricultural soils. I'm going to mention a few of them. If you want to in the chat, you're welcome to kind of come up with some ideas of your own of how plastics might enter soil. So one of them is through plastic mulching. Has anyone seen these big sheets of plastic in agricultural soils that help farmers fight weeds? They kind of help control the temperature in the soil. Maybe some of you have seen these before. Those break down in the environment, add plastic to the soil. Irrigation tubes, water might carry plastic and spread plastic into the soil. A bunch of litter could be entering, either wind blown from other places or put directly on the soil, maybe drivers passing by. Farm equipment breaks down and adds soil in. Roads, a lot of tires kind of shred, and that tire wear can contribute plastics. For example, organic amendments, so things like compost, when we're adding compost to soil, if that compost has plastic in it, that could be adding some. There's the air might contain plastics. Has anyone, maybe you've thought about dust a bit and what dust might come from in your house? A lot of that is shreds from like carpet. Maybe if you have a cat, there's some fur. Our clothing sheds a bunch of plastic fibers. So this is often airborne and it can enter agricultural soils from atmospheric deposition. And then biosludge, this is from wastewater treatment facilities. They isolate the organic matter, and sometimes that can have a lot of plastic in it. If we think about when we wash our clothes, often our clothes are made entirely or partially out of plastics, and that contributes a lot of plastic fibers, for example, to water that then enters the wastewater treatment facility and is filtered out into biosludge that's then put on agricultural soils. So yeah, does anyone else have ideas of how plastics might enter? I see pellets, fertilizer. That's a really good idea. Fertilizer can have plastics. Some seeds even, they coat individual seeds in plastic to help with germination. And I'm focusing on agricultural soils here because it's pretty relevant to us. We use these soils to grow the food we eat. There are some preliminary studies looking at potential transfer of plastics from the soil into the crop that we then harvest to consume. For plastics to be taken up by plants, they have to be extremely small, like smaller than a nanoplastic, which again is 1,000 times smaller than a microplastic. So it's hard to measure that. We don't really have methods, but there's potential for it to enter the food we eat. So yeah, and then in this presentation, I'm mostly going to be focusing on compost, because this might be one of the largest inputs of plastic into agricultural soils, aside from biosludge. So we've kind of gotten to this a bit, but I want to give you all a few more minutes to consider when you've observed plastic entering soil. If anyone has maybe a story they want to share, or if you feel more comfortable typing something up, I'd just love to hear from you, maybe when you've observed plastic entering our soils in your own experience. Yeah, some people might be throwing plastic into compost at school. That's something really hard to control. We want everyone to compost, right? But it's hard to make sure that we're not throwing in, whether it's those produce labels that are plastic, or your forks, plastic forks or whatever, into the compost. Trash by roads, litter is a big issue. Yeah, definitely, with coming from Oklahoma, plastic and tornadoes, that's a huge one. Tornadoes, you know, tear down houses and create a ton of litter. They carry you know, chunks of houses to other places. And if we think about construction, we're often using quite a bit of plastic in that too. So plastic contamination, as well as other types of contamination from tornadoes. Baling twin is made of plastic. Yeah. Adney, do you want to share any more about that? I don't think I'm familiar with baling twin. Yeah, gum, that's plastic too. Oh, baling twine. There we go. Wow. Yeah, totally. And twine, you know, sure does shred over time. Thanks for all these answers. Yeah. Plastic enters our soils in so many ways, and it's good to kind of be conscious about this. We'll talk about it a bit more at the end of the presentation about what we can do, but just something to keep in mind. As citizen scientists, we can observe this. So yeah, I'm gonna get in a bit to plastic and compost now. So compost is made up of a whole bunch of different things, mostly, so this is all organic waste, natural things. And this is mostly kind of food scraps, wood shavings, manure. We can even put, you know, dead animals can be composted, ash from the fireplace, paper, all sorts of different things. And one that's of a special concern when it comes to potential introduction of plastic is food waste. Someone mentioned that they've seen people throwing plastics into the compost bin at school. That happens a lot. Grocery stores often, when they compost their food, they don't unpackage any of their bread, or yogurt containers. All sorts of plastic types make it into material that is to be composted. And yes, especially from food. But any one of these other things can also contain some amount of plastic. So what is compost? Compost is not just food scraps. Compost is organic matter that has gone through the process of composting. And composting has three major stages. They're kind of big words: mesophilic, thermophilic, and the curing stage. And it's really done by microbes. So microbes consume all of the readily available carbon in the compost. So if we think about all those sugars, the things that are really accessible and quick to use as energy, are first kind of eaten up by the microbes and all sorts of other soil vertebrates and invertebrates that inhabit the compost pile and do this very valuable work for us. But as they are eating all this, essentially sugar, very available carbon, they get really excited, they're really active, and it really heats up the compost to super high temperatures. We're talking 130 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 to 40 degrees Celsius, even higher than that sometimes. Or sorry, the 40 to 65 degrees Celsius. That's when the compost pile, if you go to an industrial composter, you'll see these piles steaming even throughout the winter. It's very impressive. There's been some research to capture the heat from them and use it as energy. Yeah, so they heat way up, and in this process, they kind of sanitize themselves in case there's any sort of disease-causing item in there. Some people put, animal mortalities in compost piles. This thermophilic phase where the microbes are very excited and using a ton of energy, make sure that the compost, when it's used in the end, is very safe. And that's after the curing phase, when that available carbon has kind of been used up and it's more stable. Yeah, and that's how compost is produced. But throughout this process, we might be generating microplastics. So plastics in the environment kind of continue to shred and break down. Has anyone seen, maybe if you leave a plastic bucket outside or some sort of plastic cup or something, are any of you familiar with this process of plastics kind of breaking down under the sun or with weather? Maybe. That's exactly what happens to most any plastic in the environment, especially in composting, where it's heated to these extreme temperatures and cooled back down and turned throughout the process. Many, many ways that we could potentially be creating or introducing more plastic. So there's all this potential plastic in compost. My question is, how much is there, right? And there's actually not been a single study in the US measuring this. So it's kind of an unknown issue to us that we need a lot more information about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my study and the way I'm going about measuring plastics in compost. And this kind of starts with, me going around to compost piles and sampling some and drying it out, try to get that moisture out. Then I sieve it through 5 millimeters because I'm just looking at plastics that are 5 millimeters and below. That's what I classify as a microplastic. I'm using a metal sieve here, so I'm not introducing plastic. And then I put it in hydrogen peroxide. Maybe you're familiar with this if you've ever had a cut. Sometimes it's used to help sterilize that. Hydrogen peroxide, when it's really strong, is able to dissolve organic matter. And that helps kind of get rid of the compost that's not the plastic, so that I can then filter it through sieves again and remove that organic matter and just kind of have the compost. So then I dry the sieve with hopefully the microplastics on it and not too much organic matter. And I make sure when it's drying that it's under foil. As I mentioned before, sometimes air can have plastic in it. So I want to make sure that I keep that out. And then I have to look at it under a microscope to try to count and isolate these microplastics out. As I mentioned, that those plastics are often smaller than we can reliably see with our eyes. So it's a lot of tedious work. And then after removing these plastics, I'm using a spectroscoper, which is a machine that is able to kind of shoot an array at a microplastic particle or a particle that I think is a plastic that will then tell me what the material actually is and whether it's plastic and what type of plastic, just so I know that these potential plastic particles I'm pulling out are actually plastic and what type they might be. So to kind of give you all a better idea of what this process looks like, we're going to do a little exercise to see if you might be able to identify plastic particles. So I'm going to let you all guess which of the following looks like it might be a plastic. And these are all pictures that I've taken with a microscope.
So put your answer in the chat. I have a poll, but it's going to block the slide. So we need to see the slide. So when you have a guess, just put what you think in the chat. I see Xavier put C. Adney says A. Let's see what others think. A, all but D. Lily says all of the above. Anyone else want to give a shot? See what you think. What do you think, Sarah? Which is it?
Cool. So actually everyone's correct. It's all of the above. These are all different instances of plastics. Kind of a trick, because so picture number C is what I usually see with my work. The grid pattern below is the sieve that I'm looking at, and that little clear plastic, potentially plastic, is what I would consider to maybe be a plastic fiber. Fibers are really difficult though, and I'll get a bit more into that later. But the other things, plastic bag. D was part of a bracelet, a friendship bracelet that I had that was made out of a plastic thread. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't contaminating my samples with that plastic, given that it was on my hand. So yeah, good job. We're just gonna give one more shot at it now that you've seen a few examples of what plastic might be. So again, take your guess here on what you think might be or might not be plastic. Yeah, which letters might be plastic. See, maybe D looks like all but C, maybe D. A few more seconds, all except for C. Yeah, does anyone want to take some guesses at what these materials might be? Does anyone recognize any of these or have guesses? And bonus points if you can guess. String, okay. Few more seconds. Paper. Which one do you think might be paper? Yeah, these are some really good guesses. And actually, a lot of my work here has kind of been trying to figure out which these are, because often organic pieces can look very much like plastics. So you all did a good job. Let me show the answer. It's actually just D here that might be a plastic, that I would guess to be a plastic. A lot of you guessed that it might be paper. It's actually a paper towel that I use to wipe down the lab surface. You can see it's kind of dirty up in the upper right corner. There's some black from the dirt on the lab bench. B, that was a good guess for those who guessed it might be plastic. I think it actually might be an onion shell or onion skin. I'm guessing that because can you all observe those little round circles that comprise the whole thing. There are a bunch of interconnected circles, and those look to me like cell structure. So that's kind of one of the main indicators I use to tell if something's an organic matter or piece of organic matter or not, are those cell structures. So I would not guess that B is a plastic. C is a piece of a paper. So another good guess there by you all. And D, D might be a plastic. There's actually no reliable way to tell whether a fiber with that shape is plastic or is not plastic. So it could just as likely be a string from your pants. You can see that it's kind of clear and black in color. So that might be a piece of clothing that's been dyed with stripes, black and white, for example. And this kind of thing, we'd actually need to extract and use a spectroscopy to kind of identify it as a plastic or not. Unfortunately, though, because they're so tiny, there's not really a good way to measure fibers. So that's a method we're still very much lacking in the scientific community of how to measure plastic or organic fibers. So as you all kind of experienced here, plastics are hard to isolate and hard to detect, hard to tell what might be a plastic and what might not be. And there's a lot of gray area here. Visual methods like looking under a microscope, as you all kind of got a glimpse at, can be pretty subjective. There's a hard way to, it's kind of hard to say as fact, yes, this is a plastic, I know it to be one with our eyes alone. I have developed a dichotomous key that kind of helps identify with a bit more guidance what it might be. But there are also chemical methods. We can try to dissolve all of the solution and all of the material and kind of isolate by density, for example, what might be plastic. And fibers especially are a challenge, as you all saw. So I'm just going to quickly touch on plastics and agricultural soils in our last 10 minutes here before ending on a light note. But yeah, we're still kind of developing in this field too to kind of get at what the impacts of plastic and soil might be in terms of physical effects, biological effects on life, and then chemical effects as well. So we know that plastics are not our usual piece of soil, right? Soil is made up of a bunch of different things that can be clay, sand, organic matter, and sometimes plastic. And plastic, it doesn't really absorb water. So if water hits soil full of plastic, maybe less water will be absorbed, more will erode off. The soil itself might not hold water as well. The density of the soil might change because plastics are really lightweight. So with this, all of these physical impacts of plastic in the soil, that really impacts what can live in the soil then. So we've observed that there might be changes to the microbial community in soils. Worms have been found to have plastic in their biomass. We've seen those studies about, sea turtles or birds having plastic in their stomachs. Well, worms might too in their intestines. It also changes how nutrients cycle in the soil. Plastics might absorb some nutrients. They might emit or leach out some nutrients, such as different chemicals called plasticizers that we add to plastic to give it its unique properties, whether it's flexibility or durability. And those might, it might transfer nutrients in the soil as plastics move. So yeah, they might interact with the soil nutrient cycling. And really all of these are kind of interconnected. If there are physical impacts, that's also going to impact the biology and the chemistry. So there's not just one way that plastics might impact the soil ecosystem. but yeah, I guess that's kind of the only, I don't want to kind of focus too much on the negatives. I want to spend some time to think about what we can do. And yeah, I guess I'll have some room for discussion after this, but there are a lot of things we can do on our end to prevent plastics from entering the soils. Here are some ideas. We can talk to people about our concerns. This is actually one of the most impactful ways. Our own impact alone, if we try to prevent them going into soils themselves, is wonderful. But if we are able to set an example for others and maybe impact others as well, and kind of join together in this effort to prevent plastics from entering our environment, that can have much greater impact. But yeah, we ourselves, we could try to reduce our use of disposable items. So maybe bring reusable containers, try to upcycle things. So if you have a water bottle, maybe you can cut it up and use it as a pot to grow a plant. Just kind of giving that plastic a longer lifetime of use before throwing it away. We can also take more direct action and kind of write companies, say, I saw that you have this packaging that's plastic. I'm a consumer of your product and I would like it, like I'm disappointed that it has plastic. Please consider to removing the plastic. We can write policymakers. You all are able to write policymakers about your concerns of plastic entering the environment. That's a really powerful way to enact change. Yeah, but now I want to kind of hear any thoughts you might have on how you could potentially reduce plastic use, whether it's yourself, in your community, or even larger scale, thinking about in your state, in the state of Vermont, in the country, in the world. Yeah, go ahead and make use of that chat, and I'll give you all a minute or two to think of some responses, or if you want to share out, you're welcome to as well with audio. Yeah, I really like this answer. Metal water bottles, bigger chip bags, no paper plates. Those are all really good thoughts. Paper plates actually do have that plastic film lining often. So although they're paper, they do contain plastic. Usually, some do not. Yeah, we can become scientists. I like that. Find new ways to package items. There's been some research on compostable plastics. Maybe you all are familiar with those. We're still very much in the awkward teenage years of those materials. Although they're labeled as compostable, they often don't really break down as we hope, and they act just like plastics in the environment. Getting fungi to digest it, that's really cool. Going to use a biodegradable row cover. Yeah, there's biodegradable plastic. Sheep wool, for example, can also be used to cover rows in agriculture, and that's completely a natural material. Reusable silverware, that's really great. I love the reuse, kind of thinking about how we can reduce our use of disposable items. Rice plastic, yeah, that's a good example of a decompostable plastic. Cool. Well, that's about all I have for you. I want you to consider thinking about this and sharing it, and maybe thinking, instead of just worrying, but thinking more in the action and what we can do to make a change, because this is something that our generation will have to deal with. And yeah, unfortunately, plastics continue to be produced every day, and you know, a lot of the uses are very important for plastics, but there are a lot of ways that we can cut down on plastic or think a bit more before they're used ourselves, or you know, on a larger scale, writing policy makers and companies, etc., that are producing the plastics. So with that, yeah, thank you all for sharing this hour with me today. Your time is very valuable, and I very much appreciate all of the attention, energy, and participation you've given. Just want to make time if anyone has comments or questions they want to share, you're welcome.
Yeah, does anyone have any final questions for Sarah? It can be about her work. It could even just be about the schooling she's done to get to where she is today. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Sterna.
So why did you decide to work with plastics instead of like chemical polluters or like phosphorus? Why plastic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that any sort of pollutant is just as important as plastic to address. I chose to work with plastic because there's so little research on it. For the like how big of an issue it is and how ubiquitous plastics have become, it's really surprising how little we know about them. And the big obstacle there is we don't really have reliable or good methods. As we saw, like with visual methods, it's like, well, that kind of looks like a plastic. Is there a way to tell, or especially with fibers that are most of the plastics in the environment? There's not really a good method there. So I wanted to kind of see if I could help with that side of things.
I'm wondering about something. So I live in the middle of the forest and stuff, but when I'm hiking or whatever, I still find like bottles and trash in the middle of the woods where there's like no houses and stuff. And I want to pick it up, but I think, well, I'm just bringing it to the trash. What's going to go in the landfill? So what's the point if there's nowhere to put it? You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't feel like I'm actually helping. It feels like I'm helping where I live, but making it worse for someone else. What would you do about that?
That's a really, really good point. Landfills are kind of just an issue for future generations to deal with, and they're not a permanent solution. I would say it's still important to pick up trash because then you're preventing all ecosystems from being very contaminated with it. If we can just maybe forfeit the areas where the landfills are, because those are hopefully managed well, right? People are looking at the leachate or the liquids that run out of the landfill, that's being monitored. So there's a lot more care that goes into landfills than plastic just decomposing and contaminating our more natural soils.
Is there anything to consider when picking up plastic, like for your safety, about it being like, is it dangerous to pick up?
I'd say generally it's not, unless it was used to contain something that's dangerous. Of course, you want to make sure that if it's, you know, pokey, that you're not potentially gonna get a splinter or cut, but I'd say nothing too much. There's one thing. Another option for plastics is incineration. This is a kind of a newer option. Biomass burning, instead of putting things into a landfill, you can burn them for energy. You just have to make sure you have a really good filter so you're not creating air pollution. This is done mostly in Western Europe. They're kind of getting rid of landfills, or don't have as many as we have in the United States, because they burn a lot more of their trash and filter the air and emissions, but they get a lot of energy that way.
Is there a way to get Vermont to do that?
Potentially. I don't know how interested people might be. It's definitely not a perfect process and does result in some pollution. So yeah, definitely you should all look into it if you're interested. Biomass incineration.
Okay, well, great question, Sharna. Thank you for asking that. We are at the top of the hour now, so I think we should all thank Sarah for her time tonight. Want to thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again, maybe at one of the other events that I told you about tonight. But thank you for coming, and keep asking questions. That's what scientists do. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all. I really enjoyed this, and thanks for your participation. Keep asking those questions about microplastics and thinking about how you can reduce your plastic use. Yeah.